Hi, I'm Nicole and I am codependent. I am going to be studying the Codependence Anonymous book a little because I want to start taking our Melody Beatty readings. She's an author that reads a lot on codependency to an actual CoDA meeting. So I am going to start reading some of the parts that we may not want to read during our meetings so that we have more time to really get into the meat and potatoes. So I'm going to share this, and I'm going to share questions now, and then each meeting that we do, which is Tuesday or Thursday afternoons, we do codependency meetings. On Tuesdays, we will do straight from the book of Codependence Anonymous study. And on Thursdays, we will read the Codependence Guide to the 12 Steps by Melody Beatty. So I'm just going to go ahead and read this right now. Chapter 1, Beginning Our Journey. Perhaps some of these thoughts are yours. If he or she changed, everything would be all right. I can't control this pain, these people, and what's happening. It's all my fault. I keep getting into the same bad relationships. I feel so empty and lost. Who am I? What's wrong with me? Our sadness and loss bring us here. We want to change, and we want it now. We want to escape our misery. We want to feel good about ourselves and live abundant, fulfilling lives. We want happy, healthy relationships. If any of the preceding thoughts are yours, then you're not alone. Many of us in the Fellowship of Codependence Anonymous have felt deep sadness, anxiety, despair, and depression, and have turned here to each other and a higher power for our sanity to be restored. What brings us here may be a crisis such as a divorce, a separation, imprisonment, health problems, or attempt at suicide. Some of us are feeling very weary, desperate, or devastated. If you're new to recovery, this moment may not seem like something to remember, but someday you might consider it a celebration. Many of us find our pain to be a gift, for without these feelings of emptiness and despair, we can't experience a real desire to change our lives. With this desire, many of us know we won't make the decision to change. We want balance, happiness, and peace, but to change, we must acknowledge these feelings and decide to climb out of this pit of pain. Once we make this decision, many of us ask, how do I go about this change? Where can I get help? At first, many of us think that we can solve our problems by just trying harder or by studying techniques to change people. Often our pride or upbringing cause us to think that we can do this ourselves. These two approaches, however, block our road to a better way of life. What is codependence? Somewhere along the road, we learned about codependence. We hear about it from a friend or a therapist. We see it mentioned in the news. Many of us wonder if codependence describes who we are. Codependence is a disease that deteriorates our souls. It affects our personal lives, our families, children, friends, and relatives, our businesses and careers, our health, and our spiritual growth. It's debilitating, and if left untreated, causes us to become more destructive to ourselves and others. Many of us come to a point when we must look beyond ourselves for help. When we attend our first meeting of Codependence Anonymous, many of us find a source for help. Each of us arrives here from different directions. Some of us are urged by family members or friends. Some of us come to CoDA when our physicians, psychiatrists, or therapists see the need. Many of us reach CoDA's doorstep after treatment for codependence from other addictions. Whether it's crisis or curiosity that brings us to CoDA, many of us learn about the characteristics of codependence in our first meeting. These characteristics help us determine what unhealthy patterns weave in and out of our lives. Do we live in extremes instead of balance? How do we, our mates, children, and friends suffer because of our behaviors? Do our codependent behaviors cause our relationships to stagnate, deteriorate, or destruct? If the answers to these soul-searching questions cause us to admit I am codependent and I need help, then we're beginning to locate recovery's path. It all begins with an honest look at ourselves. The following characteristics of codependence outlined in CoDA pamphlet, What is CoDA, can help us to identify to what degree this illness affects us. Many of us struggle with the questions, what is codependence? Am I codependent? We want precise definitions and diagnostic criteria, before we will decide. As stated in the 8th tradition, Codependence Anonymous is a non-professional fellowship. We offer no definition or diagnosed criteria for codependence. What we do offer from our experience are characteristic attitudes and behaviors that describe what our codependent histories have been like. We believe that recovery begins with an honest self-diagnosis. We come to accept our inability to maintain healthy and nurturing relationships with ourselves and others. We begin to recognize that the cause lies in long-standing destructive patterns of living. These patterns and characteristics are offered as a tool to aid in self-evaluation. They may be particularly helpful to newcomers. I'm going to list off a few of these characteristics in each of the categories that they give, and then I'm just going to include the information in like a slide or something. So we have denial patterns. We may minimize, alter, or deny how we truly feel, perceive ourselves as completely unselfish and dedicated to the well-being of others. We lack empathy for feelings and needs of others. We label others with their negative traits. We have low self-esteem patterns. We value others' approval over our thinking, our feelings, and behavior. We seek recognition and praise to overcome feeling less than. We have difficulty admitting a mistake. We need to appear to be right in the eyes of others and may even lie to look good. Compliance patterns. Codependents often are extremely loyal, remaining in harmful situations too long. They compromise their own values and integrity to avoid rejection or anger. Are hypervigilant regarding the feelings of others and take on those feelings. We have control patterns that codependents often believe that people are incapable of taking care of themselves, attempt to convince others what to think, do, or feel, freely offer advice and direction without being asked. We adopt an attitude of indifference, helplessness, authority, or rage to manipulate outcomes. Some avoidance patterns. Codependents often act in ways that invite others to reject, shame, or express anger towards us. Judge harshly about what others think, say, or do. We avoid emotional, physical, or sexual intimacy as a way to maintain distance. We pull people towards us, but when they get close, push them away. We withhold expressions of appreciation. Many of us are shocked when we read that list because many of the characteristics describe us. Some of us are relieved to see these feelings and behaviors on paper because there's hope that we might have discovered a way out of our pain. Some of us are embarrassed as though someone is reading our personal mail or journals. We wonder, how did they find out? And if these are characteristics of codependence, then the whole world is codependent. At our first meeting, we listen to people talk about their struggles and how their lives have changed from working a program of recovery. We often hear of relationships healing, those with ourselves, our higher power, and others. We learn how we can experience freedom from an inner peace. We listen with wonder as they seem to be telling our stories, describing our problems, and talking about our most secret feelings. This may be one of the few times we don't feel strange or alone. Armed with the knowledge that we're like other people, we realize that if they can work a program and improve their lives, we can too. As we attend more meetings, we hear messages of hope loud and clear. We hear it through CoDA literature and the stories of those around us. This message of hope tells us that we can have all the gifts of recovery if we are willing. We also learn that we all suffer from this illness to some degree, so recognizing codependence can be difficult. Understanding codependent behaviors and attitudes can be especially tough because many of them are not destructive. As children, we may have used these behaviors to survive abuse or neglect. For example, we might have developed internal detectors to read our parents' moods and then develop behaviors based on their moods to keep them happy. For many of us, codependence became worse as we grew up. Behaviors that may have served us well in childhood are now causing our lives to deteriorate. As our codependence gets worse, we lose our ability to acknowledge this pain and its harm. Once we acknowledge our feelings of pain, we can begin to make the decision to change. We must also try to be patient, loving, and forgiving of ourselves while we begin this road to recovery. Each of us will recover in unique ways and at our own pace. Our paths are as individual as our personalities and our circumstances, but while we start from different points, we share a common recovery goal. The fellowship of CoDA. The road to recovery is filled with fellowship. The people of Codependence Anonymous become our dear companions on our journey. Where we may have felt isolated and helpless, we can now feel friendship and strength. One of the program's greatest blessings is the journey we take together. We try to understand and help one another. We're able to renew our trust and faith in humanity. We see growth in people who work the program and look at the Fellowship of CoDA for support. New faces are always welcome at CoDA. They give us hope because we know more people will journey with us to live more fulfilling lives. In CoDA, there is understanding and acceptance, not judgment and advice. With the love, support, and safety of CoDA Fellowship, we can begin to describe our own codependent characteristics and discover their sources. We learn to accept the power and guidance from others and begin to trust in a higher power or God of our own definition. We acknowledge our troubled past and accept where it might have begun. For many of us, this can be found in the abuse and neglect we experienced in our significant childhood relationships. When we may be reluctant to call some of these experiences abuse and neglect, but we might need to recognize them as part of our personal history. These issues might apply not only to our childhood emotionally and physically, but sexually, intellectually, and spiritually as well. They affect us as adults and our ability to love ourselves and others and to be loved. We often get caught in negative situations that impact our mental and physical health and well-being of others. Some of us may be unable to recognize our feelings and comprehend the disastrous path we're on. We call this denial. And just about done, I'm going to read about the denial. This is the ending of chapter 1. Denial of ourselves, our past and present, is often a great stumbling block to our early recovery. It's a term often used when we don't accept our codependent behaviors as we learn about their patterns and characteristics, or as we hear them described in another person's story. Often in our frustration, we clearly see what everyone else is doing wrong, but we can't recognize our own wrongdoing. Some of us come to a place of despair and think of nothing else but giving up. We isolate from our friends and families, many times rejecting their love. Some of us go to elaborate degrees to create the all-together act in their homes, marriages, family, jobs, friendships, and social lives. Try as we might to do otherwise, we often experience devastating marriages, parenting and family relationships, friendships, and careers. Sometimes, even then, our denial continues. We may become so entangled in denial and control that we're forced to accept the hand of recovery through formal intervention and treatment. Eventually, we may get involved in separation or divorce, legal action, imprisonment, attempted suicide, hospitalizations for physical-related illnesses, mental problems, job loss, or a sidelined career. We walk an extremely lonely and empty path in denial, whether we suffer from devastation or try to appear altogether. We usually reach a point where denial no longer works. We finally determine enough is enough. We seek the hands of others in CoDA and, if necessary, professional help. And acceptance. As we break through our denial, we're better able to determine the degree of our problem. We recognize our denial as a symptom of codependence and see it as a process that continually emerges, subsides, and evolves throughout our lives. As we continue our recovery in CoDA, we replace denial with acceptance. We progressively embrace our past and current life with honesty, openness, and a willingness to change. We move beyond denial and identify the harm our codependent decisions and behaviors have caused us personally, as well as our families, careers, physical health, and spirituality. We see how codependence has allowed us to become trapped in unhealthy relationships, situations. It affects every aspect of our lives. As we see our journey more clearly, we recognize that our journey is not advanced by force, will, intellect, or even strength of character. At some point, most of us acknowledge a higher power as the guide on our journey, the source of our progress. We may become more aware that we're on a spiritual journey. We know we're not alone when we accept our codependence. Together, we're learning how to love and be loved, and how to live life rather than merely survive it. Recovery in CoDA is an ongoing process. It's a life that constantly challenges us. Recovery isn't earned like a merit badge. It is a way of living that evolves with us every day. The Serenity Prayer expresses how our awareness that recovery is about living life as it unfolds. These simple phrases affirm that our recovery is lived one moment, one decision, one day at a time. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Some of us become nervous at the mention of spirituality or a higher power. Even if you've given up on a higher power or wonder if such a being exists, you're welcome to the program of Codependence Anonymous. This is not a religious program, but a spiritual one. It's a program for finding peace within. Over time, most everyone makes a conscious choice to work this spiritual program, decides what their higher power should be. With the help of a loving higher power, the program of Codependence Anonymous, and those who join us on this journey, each of us can experience the hope of recovery. We find the willingness to change, grow, and evolve toward the positive, loving potential that lies within us. Through the guidance of our higher power, the program of Codependence Anonymous, and the CoDA family, each of us can experience the hope of recovery and a life filled with peace and joy. That is Chapter 1 in the Codependence Anonymous book. Thanks for listening.